So we're going to start with the Stewardship Module Overview. Let me just show you what that document looks like.
I don't know what this is, by the way. I have no idea what this is.
All right, so this is the document that we're going to be kind of going through. You won't see this while I'm talking, but this is kind of the outline I'm going to be looking at. The Stewardship Module is made up of a few major components, one of them being named spaces, which is similar to what we had in the campaign module for recognition opportunities. So we'll talk through what named spaces are and how it fits into stewardship. We'll be looking at a new section called faculty positions. That lets us keep track of different types of faculty positions that are tied to funds within one. We'll also look at activities, which is a way for our stewardship team to keep track of any type of correspondence they might be having, notes that they're keeping, both on people that they're stewarding, constituents in one, and any funds that they may be working directly with, adding notes to those, whether or not that's activity that they're doing with those funds. So we'll take a little look at activities. And the last section within the stewardship module is the last addition that we made that you'll see in the scholarship module. It are some changes, additions that we made to the donors and contacts section to give you additional functionality with stewardship against those donors and contacts. All right, so if we start, and I believe I'm going to start this up here as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to open up, most of you will not have seen this before, but I wanted to show you anyway. This is a security application, and I just wanted you to see that security has been tied to the stewardship module as well. So controls on each of those sections that we just looked at, activities, faculty positions, named spaces, those are all tied to stewardship, as well as controlling the functionality or the functions of the items within the page. So add, modify, delete. Those are all controlled with the security module. The stewardship module is found alphabetically in our menu. So we can see stewardship here. And when we open that up, we'll see those sections that are found within the stewardship module. I'm going to start with named spaces. And we'll take a look at some of the features that go along with named spaces. So our named spaces can be tied to a very specific kind of effort. So we're using the name campaign to define this. But let's say that you wanted to have some named spaces or recognition opportunities that are tied to a specific effort. In this case, maybe something like a new building that you're putting up. And within that project of putting up this building, you are creating named spaces for that building. For example, you might have a naming opportunity for the building itself. You may have a naming opportunity for different rooms within this building that you're putting up, or classrooms, or furniture, or paintings, or artwork. All of those things can be tied to that specific campaign or that specific fundraising effort. You may also have just general types of naming opportunities that aren't tied to a specific campaign or fundraising effort that just generically live in a list for you to use. So the cool thing about having named spaces like this, searchable named spaces that can be built out here, is it gives you an opportunity, your development officers or the stewardship team, the opportunity to search for naming recognition or naming opportunities that have not been assigned to anybody yet. Let's just change to one of our campaigns, which in this case we're going to go to this Agilon building phase 1. And this is going to list out all of the naming opportunities that are, or the namespaces that are tied to that particular fundraising effort, in this case, Agilon Building Phase 1. And what I have built in here are a set of different categories. So I really wanted to separate the named spaces for this particular campaign within the building into specific items. So I've got a room that people can name, I've got artwork, I have furnishings. Those are all built-in categories tied to the specific naming campaign called Agilon Building Phase 1. And then within there, in this case I've got furnishings, I have a whole set of boardroom chairs that people can they can put their name on based on whether or not they've given us the proper amount of money, in this case minimum recognition of $1,000. If we go ahead and choose this one down here, which is already chosen, and Dave Brimmeyer is the person who's set up with that, so I can go ahead and drill into that chair that's available, and we can see the detail of that named spaces. So we can see which campaign it's tied to. We can see that it's tied to furnishing. It has a title on it, so it's a boardroom chair. We've uploaded a photo of what that chair looks like. This happens to just be a naming plaque. Minimum recognition amount, and I've also identified who the contributor is. Now that needs to be a constituent, so we can tie it specifically to someone. I have text tied to recognition, text tied to the field called text. I also have two new document fields that can be brought in. Specifically, if you're thinking about some of our larger naming opportunities, like when people are naming buildings and whatnot, or putting their signage up, there may be a legal document that's tied to that. That can be this agreement document that we would upload. And there might also be a separate specification document that's tied to this naming opportunity that gives you all of the very specific things about this signage that needs to go up. The color, the size, the material it's built in. This gives us the ability to have multiple documents that are tied to each of our naming opportunities, each of our named spaces. In this case, you could also then specify whether or not this is tied to a specific fund or a specific group. These are all fields that we're familiar with giving, group, college, type, purpose, department, usually things that are tied to the fund. There's also anonymous flags that are set to this, so if you have the need to track a named space but identify it as anonymous, it's probably not all that common to have someone say they want their name on something but then tell us it's anonymous, but this would be a way for you to identify that. And then there are some additional variable fields that are tied to the namespace. In this case, I've turned on, or I've identified a couple that I wanted on. I wanted to use one of my variable date fields to identify the date that we actually received the gift. So we can come back and get that date and add it to this namespace. I also wanted to have a place for me to track the actual gift amount. So even though the minimum recognition amount is $1,000, I wanted to be able to track how much they actually gave. Was it 1,000? Was it 500? Was it 2,000? But you can actually tie that to this. If you're interested in actually tracking, for example, the actual gift that was used to tie to this or pledge, you might be interested in adding new variable fields for pledge number or for gift number if you wanted to actually make that tied specifically to a contribution. The last thing I want to talk about with these namespaces is these extra options here for tying in related donors. So at the top we have this contributor ID. That's Dave Brimmeyer. So this is the primary person who is tied to this named space. You can link up to 10 additional, 10 additional IDs that are tied to this. So if you have other family members that aren't the primary donor, but they still want their family to be tied to this namespace, you can add them to the particular naming opportunity or namespace. so that, and this is what I was trying to show you earlier, when you're searching for named spaces, you can find them by their ID, by either being the contributor ID or one of the related donors, so that it's easy to find them, even though they may not be the primary person. This adding somebody as a related donor to a named space will also allow this named space to show up in the constituent profile for both Robert Wolf and Dave Brimmeyer. And now it's time for some questions. What kind of questions do we have about named spaces?
Hey Bob, it's Lisa. I've got a quick question. I know you're shocked. Can we have more than 10 related IDs? I'm thinking, for example, we sometimes have a classroom that might be named by, for example, the Korean Parents Association, and there might be 15 families that got together to name that classroom. Is it possible to add more than 10, or is that the absolute maximum?
It is set as a maximum to only allow that many. I think there's going to be some examples, in fact we've talked about this one before, where you might even have a recognition wall. Yeah, the plaques that maybe have hundreds of names on them. This would not be the place to put those.
Right. Well, those are the war memorials, and those are plaques. I'm thinking more about classrooms in this context.
Yeah, it is. We did make a decision to limit that. Now, if I have a huge clamoring from my audience and I need to add more, I can add more. I just have to do development. It's not as simple as just saying I'd like to add a few more. It would be I have to do development and decide what my maximum number would be. Right now, it's set to 10.
Okay, thank you.
There is also a keyword search. So in this case, let's say that I don't know what campaign, I don't know what campaign these are tied to, but I wanted to find all of my boardroom chairs. Or actually, let's say I wanted to find, I know I've got some artwork out there. So let's say I know that there's a mural naming opportunity. So I can also use a keyword search to search for something like a mural. Okay, there it is. It's a minimum of $75,000 to find the lobby mural, and I can see which campaign it's tied to as well. So are there any other questions about named spaces?
This is Penny at the Kansas State Foundation.
Yeah, Penny.
I'm wondering, we got in a little late. How do you get the campaigns defined? Did you already do that?
I didn't, and let me show you. So this is using some basic functionality of the campaign module, but it's so simple. So when you want to create this specific effort, fundraising effort or campaign, there's a new function called admin stewardship, and within that is a function called campaign. So when you go into campaign, it brings up a list of all of the campaigns that are in the campaign module, along with the new ones that maybe are being created. So I'll just go ahead and click on Add, or you could copy one that already exists.
Yeah.
So within Campaign, Stewardship Campaign, you can set up, give it a new campaign name. So I might call this Bob's New Campaign, or, yeah, that's fine. AIGN, there we go. Giving it a description. And then we can do a short description if we want, start date and end date, definition text, and now you have a new campaign that you can work with. So these would be each of your, and search for it.
Hey Bob, we've got a quick question over here at the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
We're wondering, is the information from the campaign module duplicated in the stewardship module?
It's well, yeah. So if you have already created campaigns in the campaign module and you're using that for your current namespaces already, you would see all of those.
Perfect. Thank you.
You bet. Each campaign that you set up will also have its own set, or can have its own set of opportunity categories. So like I set up with my campaign, Agilon building phase, I wanted to have a certain set of categories: art, furnishing, lobby, primary, room, which are all different naming rights for different elements that I wanted to collect. You don't have to go into a lot of detail with your categories, but it is a really nice way to get groupings of naming opportunities within each of these little campaigns that you're building.
Bob, this is Mark from KSU. I was wondering if so you can add anything, as many as you want, into subcategories of those categories?
Right. These opportunity categories, you can create as many as you want on each of your campaigns. Yes. And then within each of those, you can create as many naming opportunities within each of those categories.
Great. Thank you. That's what I was asking.
Okay. Great. And yeah, so this copy function is wonderful. So once you start to create things, you can simply copy them over and over and over without having to recreate them all manually. So that gives us namespaces. It allows us to keep track and see within our namespaces all of those active and open and taken namespaces. Any other questions on namespaces that I can answer for now? All right, well, I'm going to go next, and by the way, once we finish, if we want to come back and ask more questions later on, you can certainly hang out, and I will be happy to answer those questions later, too. So let's go next into faculty positions. Now, you all might call these things different, have different names for these, but basically what we're looking at are faculty positions or endowed positions that are tied to funds, so funds that are endowing positions. So within these faculty positions, I've given us some types of chairs and dean's chair, faculty fellowships, faculty staff awards, and professorships as the types of endowed positions that are tied to funds. It's never been that easy to track those and keep track of all of those positions, not only the current positions that are being held by a fund, but historical positions that have been held by that fund and who held those positions, who held the first position, or we're calling it an inaugural holder, whether or not they've gone through their particular ceremony, whether or not the awards have been given out. So all sorts of really cool things that can be captured within faculties and positions. You might want to look up all of the faculty positions tied to a fund, so that's tied to the fund search. You may want to find just all of the chairs that are out there. And when you do something like this, you can, when you initially set this up, you'll want to set up all of the positions that are currently being held and all of the positions that are currently open, so that it's very simple to come in here and find if there's any positions that aren't currently being held. You might also want to look up by the holder ID. So if I would like to look up Dave Brimmeyer and see any positions that he's held over time, I can find all of those positions. I can use the flag here, which is current holder, and that would then only show me the people that are currently in the positions, not the people who had historically been in those positions. Does the general idea behind this make sense to everyone, at least anyone who's doing something like faculty positions or endowed positions?
Bob, this is Cleveland Clinic again. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
How does it tie back to the contributions funds page? Like search for funds and
Let's look, because I am not. Let's take a look. So let's look at Fund 400001 on the fund page. So that's contributions because they actually have some positions. So let's go look. I need Mark on this call to help me with some of those questions. 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here we go. All right, so let's drill into this. So this is showing us normal stuff at the top, fund text. I thought that I was showing, I will have to double check on this. I thought I was showing those positions here as well. Let's go back to stewardship faculty positions. So you're not going to see these on the fund page, but they're derived from the fund page, from the fund that's out there. So this lets me look up things by faculty positions by fund. I can see who those people are that currently are holding the position or have held the position, the type of position that they're holding, when they began their term, when they ended the term, if there were ceremonies around them getting that particular position, an area for us to indicate specific dates that they should be giving us or running reports, so we can also indicate whether or not those have been completed or not. Using a variable field, I've used this variable field for the date of convocation as the basis of the information we're creating when we create a faculty position. You're also going to see in at the bottom of this page within faculty positions the donors and contacts that are tied to this fund. So these donors and contacts are being pulled from the stewardship module. And Vicki, I'll have to get back to you on if there's any more linkage to the actual contribution fund page.
Okay, thanks. And Bob, this is Carrie from Cleveland Clinic. It's kind of a follow-up to the reporting and the dates and when they're completed.
Yeah.
Is there a way to also tie it back to where those actual reports are stored in Phil?
So we didn't do that. We did, they are labeled as report 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Now you could use the relabeling option to, instead of have it generically be report 1, identify what report that is. But there isn't like a table that tells us which report, what report 1 is. It would actually be done by relabeling the column. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you bet.
And I have one more question too.
Yeah.
Is there room on this page if we wanted to add a couple other fields here that we track, or is this kind of page completely taken and no extra space on it?
Let's take a look. I didn't indicate in here that there are some user variables. So let's take a look at the faculty positions user variable column setup and just see how many total user variables are on faculty positions.
Because the donor part is way under. Okay. No, really not.
All right, in faculty positions, there are 6 fields that can be used as drop-downs. There is a numeric field, there is a currency field, there are 4 date fields. If that helps, Vicki. So there's quite a few faculty position fields that can be added.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. So come back into here. So I think that is, I'm going to go ahead and add just so that we can see what else we've got. So this is also, if I come back in here and say I'm going to add a new faculty position to Fund 4, 5, 6, 7. As I add a new faculty position to a fund, I can right away see those people that are donors and contacts that are tied to that particular fund. Now this will mostly, I think, come in handy for kind of transitioning from maybe tracking where you've been tracking those positions up till now where you've maybe been tracking them or had to have tracked them in the donors and contacts. So this would be a way while you're adding a new donor, or excuse me, a new faculty chair or something like that for a fund, you can actually see where they lived as donors and contacts before to create the new version of them.
Bob, this is Mark from KSU.
Yes,
Got a
Mark.
question on that. When you say the contacts, is that the scholarship contacts you're talking about?
Yes, sir, Mark. That is the scholarship donors and contacts section.
Okay, yeah, that's where we do have it now.
And so that does allow you some visibility. All right, well, let's take a look at another section that we've included with stewardship, and that is stewardship activities. So stewardship activities gives us the opportunity as someone who has access to the stewardship module. It allows us to create contact records. So if you've been in stewardship and jealous of the development officers who've been able to add contacts and plans and tie those to the people they're working with, that's what we've built here. It's the same kind of functionality for stewardship, so you can write contacts and plans against constituents that are in the database to make notes against them, and that would be setting the view by ID. I'll just let this think for a second as it shifts the view from being to an ID. So I would actually be using the stewardship activities to add a new contact note for Robert Wolf from the stewardship module. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's going to look, if you're familiar with contacts and plans within the prospect module, it's really the same form except for there's a couple things that are different. In fact, you're going to see these changes in the prospect module as well. So same fields with date, time, duration, evaluation. You have the ability to tie it to a constituent, which is, this is my constituent ID. You can also tie this activity to a fund. Maybe you want to tie it to both a person and a fund. But if you've ever needed to kind of keep track of different things you're doing to a fund or different actions that you need to remember to do on a fund, this can now be used to do that. Create a plan to remember to do your fund review. So that can be done in here. The type drop-down list. The type drop-down list has been changed with this development so that you can have different type codes for stewardship versus the type drop-down list that's used within prospect, contacts, and plans. So they could be two completely different lists of types. Now, there might be some overlap. You may want to track all telephone conferences and have that telephone conference be visible both in the prospect module and in the stewardship module. And they could share the same code. If you want all of the notes within stewardship to be completely separated from the development officers, the prospect, contacts, and plans, then you may have a specific telephone conference code that's defined just for stewardship. So that's what's going to separate those two sets of notes, is the definition that's being set around the type code.
Bob, this is Mark again from KSU.
Yeah.
So are we talking the stewardship activities are in the contacts table?
They are in the contacts table. Yep.
Just with a different type ID.
That's right. So there's coding in the UHelp type table that tells us whether or not this type is a stewardship type, whether or not it's a prospect type, or whether it's used for both.
Okay, so now I need to Bob, this says, so
Yeah, go ahead.
can you tell us which tables, were there any new tables just for this module, or is it sharing existing tables?
There were, that is a great question. I don't know.
It's sharing the campaign table, I think I heard, and it's sharing the contact table.
Yep. I don't recall if we had to add new tables, or we did have to add new tables for the faculties positions, but we didn't have to add any new tables for activities. We were able to reuse the contacts table. We did add some additional columns to some tables, like the UHelp type table and the manager table. We also added some new columns too.
Yeah, and I think I had all those table changes, but I was just wondering, we have some existing reports for these contacts, and I don't know if we're going to have to go in there and change some of our filters here now so that we're not viewing these along with our prospect contacts.
Yeah, you might. You might want to add another clause in there to look at the help table to only pull in prospect contact types. That would certainly be useful. You bet. So another thing that was changed, and let's just show you in here. When we're looking at or we're creating, and you'll see this both in the prospects module and in the stewardship module. When you are working with managers, we can also assign a manager to be either a stewardship, so in the manager table, you can be a stewardship manager, you can be a prospect manager, or you could be both if you want to be able to add both. So we've added now into this manager drop-down an indicator. So if I'm in the stewardship module and I hit the manager table, the very top managers, these are going to be my stewardship managers. And we have a new section break here. So this is a list of the prospect managers. So they're not assigned in the stewardship module, but you can still see them. And then a new flag or divider at the bottom that is dividing out the inactive managers. And then we'll all fall down at the bottom of the page. But a new divider for managers. And if we take a look at the manager setup, this is another change that was made. Within a manager, we've added, so these new flags, are you a stewardship manager, are you a prospect manager? We've added a new constituent ID, so if you want to start tracking your managers, your development officers, your stewardship managers, and you want to link them to an actual constituent ID, so in this case Edward Frank's constituent ID, you can now do that. And you can also assign a manager to another manager to give you that second level of reporting. We also added some new variable fields to the manager page in case there's some other things that you'd like to track. Any questions about stewardship activities? Okay. So let's go look at some additions that were made to the scholarship module. And the reason we did this is because we did added the visibility of donors and contacts into the stewardship module. So we wanted to give some additional functionality to donors and contacts. So we'll look at donors and contacts. Let's go ahead and drill into and go into some that we've already looked at here. Yes, it is. Oh, maybe not. Not in there. All right, scholarships, donors, and contacts. And I'm looking at this one fund again. You could look at any fund. And this lists out my donors and contacts. One of the things that was added was another set of user variable fields to the donors and contacts. If you remember, in the donors and contacts record, there weren't any variable fields. What we had the option for is we had our type drop-down list, we had notes, we had a checkbox for letter, and that was it. What we've added to donors and contacts are 6 additional user variable fields that can be set up with drop-downs. So I turned on 2 of them. I wanted to be able to track for these donors and contacts, and maybe the deceased one wasn't a great example, but I added the donors and contacts. Actually, I think this flag might be new, adding that to the donors and contacts so you can see that they are deceased. But I turned on one that I wanted to use for tracking whether or not the thank you letters have been sent to them that come from the scholarship recipients. So I can just set a flag to yes or no as to whether or not they've been sent this year, and also whether or not the bios have been sent to this donor or contact for this year. So there's 6 new drop-down variable fields that can be used for whatever you'd like them to be used for. Tracking something like this, tying them to a relay report or tying them to a dashboard to identify who still hasn't been sent their thank yous or their bios. There is a single numeric field that has been added to donors and contacts. A decimal field, so that would be for keeping track of some type of currency, and 4 new date fields that have been added. So could have just as easily, instead of saying a drop-down with no and yes on them, maybe I would have used the date fields instead, and I would have said date, thank you date, and bio date to track the actual date in which we sent those particular pieces of correspondence to the donors and contacts. So that is, those variable fields, those were the big things that were added to the donors and contacts pages. The last thing that changed is the addition to the constituent profile all of these new sections. So, for example, a new section called namespaces, and this identifies any namespaces that are either specifically tied to where Robert Wolf is the person who gave the money, which would show up as the contributor, or if he's one of the related donors that's tied to that namespace. So it showed up on my profile because I'm a related donor, I'm not the contributor. This also gives me the ability to click on links and open up the image that was tied to the namespace so I could see the image or the bench or the tree or the whatever it is that the image is tied to that. We can also see any faculty positions that are tied to Robert Wolf. The stewardship activities that are tied to Robert Wolf. These are the the scholarships that are tied to Robert Wolf, donors and contacts. Whether or not the thank you letters have been sent, bio sent, so those are the new variable fields, so those are going to show up in here. These aren't, and then the next aren't new sections, which are scholarship recipients and other items that are tied to constituent profile. So those are the new attributes that have been added to, in conjunction with the new stewardship module. What other questions do you have about any of the elements we've talked about with stewardship?
Hey Bob, this is Carrie from Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
Is there any type of reporting feature that could be done to show, okay, a donor had so many stewardship touches and it led to an increased gift? Like, is there anything that could be done reporting-wise versus kind of manually eyeballing it with certain donors?
Sure, there's nothing written on that, but based on like what you just said, we could, if we could look at a couple different variables of to determine whether or not there's any type of correlation between stewardship contacts and an increase in donation, or so comparing those two things, increase in donations, and was there, and how many stewardship contacts were made. So you could kind of look at those two numbers in a report, but again, nothing written, but that data is all there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So this is available in 4.4. And there are a few database changes that go with that, which is why it's been pushed into 4.4.